candle burns at both ends. It will not last the night. But ah, my foes, and oh, my friends, it gives a lovely light. In Japan, there is a game of sorts called 100 Candle Stories, or Hyakumonogatari Kaidan Kai, if I'm pronouncing it correctly. The idea of the game is that you have 100 candles burning, and people take turns to tell a horror story, then take the candles to another room, blow them out, and so it goes with each story for 100 total stories. And at the point of the last candle with the last story, when you blow it out, it's supposed to have summoned some sort of spirit or creature or ghost or demon. So the last person who tells the stories has the strange encounter. Of course, psychologically, this ritual of storytelling primes you to interpret anything that you might encounter when that last candle goes out as being supernatural. But in most cases, people stop at 99 candles. But we're here to talk about 10 candles. 10 Candles is an indie story game by Stephen Dewey of Cavalry Games. It's a horror game with a somewhat unusual method of resolution involving burning tea lights as well as more conventional dice and index cards. It's a game that's about the journey, not so much the ending. The ending is always inevitable doom. So you will need index cards, markers, tea lights, 10 of them, hence the name, and a couple of handfuls of 6-sided dice. Some of one colour, the others not. Preferably things that you can see in the dark, so finally a use for glow-in-the-dark dice. The candles are lit at intervals as you set up the game so that they don't all burn out at the same time, and obviously there's some variability in how long it takes a candle to burn all the way out. But should a candle go out for any reason, they cannot be relit. You run out of candles, the game ends. When you're rolling your dice, you're forming dice pools and you're attempting to get 6s again. What is it with that? Any 6 from the dice pool means that you have a success. Any of the dice that roll a 1 are lost for the duration of that scene. If you don't get any 6s, you fail. Games Master rolls aren't really in opposition to what the players are doing, but you will roll every time they try to do something. It's to try and get more 6s than the players so that you, as the Games Master, can assert narrative control over the scene. So it's not really a Games Master role, it's more of a sometimes the narrator role. So you're wresting control of the scene over the players, who for a considerable amount of the time are going to be games mastering for themselves. You will still determine what goes on outside of challenges, but every time it comes down to a challenge, you're rolling to see whether the players dictate what happens or whether you dictate what happens. You can also prematurely darken a candle as a player to seize control of the scene for the finale of that scene. Characters are defined on index cards. So you get a little stack of cards. You get traits, one of which is a vice, one of which is a virtue. You can burn and remove your trait to re-roll all of your ones. Virtue is something good or useful or helpful. Vice is something which is the opposite. In order to invoke it or to burn the card, you will have to work whatever is on that card into the scene. So if you are an alcoholic, then maybe in your desperate search for booze while you're looting a store, you happen across some other more useful stuff. Things like that. Now, you don't define your own character. You write a virtue and a vice on your cards. You pass your virtue to the left and your vice to the right. So you don't actually get any real control over your own character, just the interpretation of your character. And this is something that I know a lot of people won't like. Losing control of your character and having to improvise it from whatever you're given. Yeah. You also get to define a moment. A moment is an event from which you can grasp some hope and hopefully get a hope dice. A hope dice is a singular die which is never removed and which always succeeds on a 5 or 6 rather than just a 6. A moment can be a goal of a sort written in the form of I will find hope, such as I will find hope when I find out what happened to my brother, or I will find hope if I don't die a virgin. Yeah, it doesn't have to be positive or negative, it's just a moment that your character will draw strength of some kind from. You gain that hope dice when you have a moment, an opportunity to weave that moment into the story. You also get a brink. Brinks are how people snap, the ways in which their psyche and their behaviour fractures. In extremis, things that people do when they're pushed to the limit, things that they're capable of when they're pushed to the limit. Again, you write these for your neighbour on the left, and they're written as I've seen you do something, such as I've seen you hide, you coward, or I've seen you hoarding food. Things like that. The GM writes a brink for the player on their left in the form of what the things in the dark have seen that person do, while the person next to the games master on their other side can establish something that the things in the dark have done. This can be a weakness, but it has to be inconsequential if it is. It's really meant to be something neutral and informative or positive, something that the things in the dark are capable of. So virtues could be things like brave, warm, comforting. Vices could be things like alcoholic or violent or things like that. At the end of each scene, the dice in the middle regenerate up to the current number of lit candles, with the other dice shifting over to be the Games Master's dice to roll in opposition to you as the dark gets stronger. So as you progress through a scene and make more and more rolls, you're going to lose more and more dice. And as the candles go out, dice are going to shift, and thus play control is going to likely shift from the players to the Games Master. At the end of each scene, you get to establish things that are true in the game. So the game is constantly evolving and changing. The players start out being able to determine lots of new things that are true about the game and the setup, gradually whittling it away until they're down to one candle. Games are run as modules, but the modules are really just the start of play. That's really all there is to it. You stack your cards at the start of play as you wish, with your brinks at the bottom and a moment on the top and everything else in between. Then you gather your dice up and you play. So play goes from scene to scene with contests between the Games Master and the active player based on which set of dice rolls the most successes and that person narrating the scene. It's a little off a little kooky, perhaps a bit closer to a Juban Shah than an actual role-playing game or a LARP. And narrative control. Look, implicit bias training is bollocks. Right, there's innumerable studies debunking it, but I think still we all know that some players will try to weasel whatever they can out of a rule system that is as flaky as this is. Players wresting control and making a nonsense of things is going to be an issue. There's also this establishing of truths which can hurl a variety of spanners into the works, requiring everyone else around the table to scramble to improvise things that make sense, to abandon ideas that they had for the game and to bring in new ones. This is really undermining of you as a games master, and it creates all kinds of requirements for the game that can be hard to meet. So, in my opinion, this isn't really a game at all, really, but rather it's more like a ritual, like the Japanese ghost stories. Unless you can get a total buy-in to the game from mature, like-minded, capable players who are all as creative as whoever it is that typically gets to be the games master, and unless everyone around the table is having a good game day where they're feeling creative and on point, I just don't think this is going to work. In terms of style, then, it's all in the way the game is played, rather than the book necessarily. There's minimal art. It's not hugely evocative of the setting. All the artwork is fairly mundane, but when you have an undefined darkness as the enemy, it's understandable why there wouldn't be much in the way of illustrations. I think it might have been better to go with black paper and white writing, but I recognise that would be relatively unreadable. But still, the style is in the play of the thing itself, not in the book. But still, on that basis, it's a 5. In terms of substance, this is a one-hit wonder and a one-trick pony. So if there's a My Little Pony equivalent of Rick Astley, that's what this game is. I don't know that it has a huge amount of replayability, and it's going to be depressing playing games where you're absolutely definitely doomed every session, and so you can't get attached to characters in such a short period of time, at least not as effectively, and not being able to define your own characters is going to create a disjunct between the player and their character as they scramble to improvise and understand their character and improvise the scenes and everything else. So in terms of substance, there's just not much here. 2. So that is a total score of 7 out of 10, 3.5 out of 5. This is a very singular and specific sort of game. If you're not into story games, if you're not into weird mechanics, if you're not into narrative sharing, this is absolutely not for you. And I think you have to be into all those things and to have a mature gaming group of highly creative and motivated people to make this work, right? And it's hard enough getting a normal game group together. So I love the idea of it. I love the aspiration for games as art, but this just seems impractical and far too singular, which is the problem with an awful lot of story games. Zang.
4 candles.
4 candles. Here you are. 4 candles.
No, 4 candles.
Well, there you are, 4 candles.
No, 4 candles. Handles for forks.
the world is full of terrible erotica, exacerbated by the existence of the internet and the low barrier to entry. And no, it's not just men describing women in terms of how their boobies jiggle. Now you too can churn out cringeworthy, barely literate erotic nonsense with filthy shades cliché. 2 players, one the dom, one the sub, fill out bingo cards with awful words and props, and then try to fit them into their purple prose over several rounds of foreplay, sex, and aftermath. Whoever scores the most by working their words into their florid gibberish wins. This game was knocked up in an afternoon, but it only cost 50 cents, so bite me. Available at DriveThruRPG and post-mort.com.